So let me first tell you a little bit about Carlos Castaneda, because it's important for you to know this, because if you're not talking about just Castaneda and Don Juan, you're talking about a very specific kind of a relationship that doesn't usually exist. It's between a student or someone who is trained to become a student and a teacher. The first thing you need to understand about good teachers, like really, really good teachers, I'm not talking about Laney or Stanford or Berkeley. I mean, people who actually know things. It's like you have a mom, and then it's you and your brother. And your mom wants to teach one of you how to make tiramisu. Looks at you, and she comes to realize, well, you suck. You're not a good student. And you know, your mom is a busy woman. She's got like 5 mouths to feed. She just came home exhausted from 10 hours of work, you know, and you guys have both expressed interest. But your mom looks at your brother and says, man, he's right there. A notebook in hand, a couple of pens, pencils, and he's also recording the recipe. Your mom is not going to pay you attention. You suck as a student. She's going to give her time and energy and attention 100% to your brother. So remember, whenever you have something valuable to give, you're always looking for someone who is a good container. Castaneda has a life, Carlos. He's like this 20-year-old kid, UCLA, pursuing a PhD in anthropology. And that's really an indication of all people. People have lives. They have interests here and there, but people have lives. It's what we talked about in class yesterday. We have a horizontal line, A to B. You're born. The moment you're born, your parents are going to condition you. They're going to give you a certain set of softwares. Your friends are going to give you another set of softwares. The moment you go to school, that's another set of softwares. The moment you turn on the TV, that's another set of softwares. And so what you realize is that you're nothing but the product of all these different forces. Your thoughts are not your own. Nothing about you can claim ownership to. And so when once in a while you look yourself in the mirror and you realize you amount to nothing, it's because, well, you've come to realize everything that everybody has given you, injected inside you, amounts to nothing. So remember, you're not the creator of depression or loneliness or misery. It's the forces around you injecting narratives. And all those stories have one function. They give you desires. Desire creates a certain emotional, intellectual poverty. You pursue them, you obtain it, you play with it, then you lose interest. That's how things work. So Castaneda, like all of us, he has a life. And in that life, there's an agenda. His agenda is, I'm doing my PhD dissertation. It's this like long-ass essay you got to do before someone gives you a diploma. And so his dissertation has to do with certain kinds of drugs. I'm not talking about Oakland people or any people who just do drugs casually or habitually. That's his agenda. I want to get to know a little bit about these drugs that shift the way you perceive things, you feel things. And so he's in Arizona with one of his friends. And he says, I'm looking for someone who's really, really good, proficient, has a good amount of knowledge in certain types of drugs that alters your perception. So his friend looks at him and says, that guy over there, he knows. He knows what peyote does. He also knows the culture of peyote. He knows the roots. He knows the causes. He has access to the spirit world. So Castaneda goes and talks to him. But something very interesting happens to Castaneda. And that's usually what happens to all of us when we encounter such a thing. Sometimes it happens gradually and sometimes it happens in time, like 2 months or 3 months or 4 months time. Castaneda finds himself becoming more and more nervous. It's only like a 2-hour conversation he has with this old man. The old man doesn't say anything. And there's a reason. Good teachers don't come out and say, let me teach you a few things. It doesn't work that way. Good teachers wait for the students to knock on their door. There are social teachers and there are asocial teachers. In other words, there are teachers like Moses who deal with your physical life, social life, political life, and there are teachers like Jesus who don't really care about your political life because that's temporal. It changes with every president. And so someone like Jesus says, I want to create something that's like rock solid inside you. I want to bring out your spirit. I want to protect it. I want to bring it to maturity and then give it back to you. He doesn't care about any of the social aspects of life. Now, if you encounter Jesus, He's going to give you some tests to see if you're worthy of his agenda. If you are working with someone like Moses, Moses just needs people because he wants to create revolution. And you need like numbers of people in the streets. That's not what Jesus wants. So any mass movement, any social movement, it requires a great number of people, okay, to pose fear into the government. Jesus doesn't care about those things. Don Juan happens to be one of those teachers who only cares for your soul. But he also knows that your soul has been contaminated by life. Your education, your experiences, the way you perceive love and relationship and all that junk, the ambitions given to you by life, right? So what happens to Castaneda is he gets really, really nervous. And that nervousness has to do with this intuitive feeling that he is in the presence of a really, really great man who knows a great deal, but he's not opening his mouth to say anything. You know, sex is great and love is great. At the age of 18, it's poison. Why? Because there's a good chance it's not going to go well. And what happens when it doesn't go well? Well, you need therapy for the next 60 years of your life. Remember, sex is wonderful. Love is beautiful. At the wrong time, they will ruin you. So just because you ask something, it doesn't mean you have the capacity to receive the answers. Like a 2-year-old going to their mother and saying, Mom, what's porn? You want to what? Let him sit down and say, Dad, son, let me show you what porn is. It doesn't work that way. And I suppose wisdom is very much the same way. It could be profoundly dangerous. So the bus comes, this old man gets on the bus and leaves. And the only thing Castaneda remembers is, I rambled on and on and on ridiculously for like 2 hours. How could I have been so stupid? And he says, man, his eyes, there was something about his eyes. And that's another clue. When someone begins to create spaces inside you, and then their image comes forth once in a while. And even though you want to get rid of that image, you can't. You know, they become, to some extent, a permanent fixture for at least a few days or a few weeks or a few months. Castaneda comes back to Los Angeles, but he can't get the image of this man out of his mind. Eventually he goes back to Arizona, finds out where this man lived, knocks on his door. He says, what took you so long? Castaneda works with Don Juan for about 2, 3, 4, 5 years. But here's the thing you need to know about really, really good teachers. Or if you want to remodel your house. There was a show on TV, it was about flipping houses. And so, you know, they buy a house without really seeing it. You open the door and you see like junk everywhere. There's some good stuff. And they come in with a bulldozer. They smash the whole thing and rebuild it. So Don Juan has only one task, to remodel the interior of Castaneda. The problem with Castaneda is that he has a sofa inside. He has love chairs inside. He has desires, ambitions, and goals inside. He has fantasies inside. So remember, the task of a teacher is enormous. There's so many things he or she has to get rid of. And good teachers are never women. They're always men. And so there comes a point, and while the remodeling is taking place, Castaneda comes to realize, I don't know where the hell my life is going. I'm all of a sudden in an ocean, and I don't know where it's going to end. I'm in the middle of nowhere. And so doubt, fear, disbelief, they all come in. I mean, armies of doubt and disbelief come in, and fear, especially fear. And you know what Castaneda does? Buys a car and goes back to California. So students come, they taste, they like, they realize it's uprooting everything about them. I mean, this idea that you have in the Gospels, for example, he looks at like these two brothers, you know, the fishermen. Drop your nets, come follow me. And say, oh yes, of course, let's do it. It's such a stupid, incomplete story because nobody knows the background. I mean, do you know what happens when you leave your wife, your parents, your kids 2,000 years ago in a community where you're obligated to take care of your people? The Gospels don't say those things, you know, and people don't think about those things in this way. And so the fear becomes so much that Castaneda just goes back home and says, fuck this, I'm not doing this. But he's been far too infected. Don Juan has contaminated him after like, I don't know, a couple of years. Comes to realize, you know, he can't live without this old man. Now, the thing you also need to understand about teachers and students is when a teacher tells you something, do it. Don't think. Feel, but don't think. And just in case you want to think, don't say you're thinking out loud. Don Juan dies. Castaneda understands a few things. Eventually, he gets his dissertation passed. He gets his PhD, I think. He gives only one interview for the rest of his life, and then he goes underground. No one knows where he went. There are lots of stories about him that he only had women around, he exploited them, manipulated them, coerced them into ABCD. He had a few men, but mostly women. But to this date, as far as I know, and people read his books and say, well, those books really are just figments of his own imagination. They can't be true because there are lots of contradictions. And that's the other thing you need to understand about teachers. They contradict themselves all the time because every moment inspires a different thought, a different response, a different form of behavior. The only way you could be a good container of Don Juan or Socrates or Jesus or Plato or any of the spiritual heroes you worship, their task initially is to get rid of your emotional life. They need to get rid of, and completely, they have to get rid of, it's like a delete button, which usually takes a long time for them to do. They have to get rid of all the emotional nonsense that lives inside you historically. They have to get rid of the way you think about stuff. That's your belief system. And your assumption that you actually know how to think. Now, when they destroy all of that, what you are left with is an empty container. Now, because most of your life you have stuff inside you, you're always engaged, you're always distracted, you have no idea what to do with emptiness. It causes a great amount of fear and confusion and conflict. And the teacher, Don Juan, whoever it is, the spiritual life, they have to protect the emptiness they've created inside you. And if fear doesn't overcome you, and if you happen to be in the right place in life with the right components, what they will do is they will create for you a physical life. And the physical life means this: you come to my house, we'll have dinner together, you will meet my family, then we'll go to the back room and we'll sit and we'll talk. That physical space will generate its own unique set of feelings and emotions inside you. Just feelings. But you have to do this over and over and over again until you have emotions where you say, the only place I want to be is at his house in the back room. The point is, if in Genesis God looks at the human being and says, I've made human being in my image, teachers ultimately do that task. They create students in their own image. Not so that they can quack like the teacher, but the reflective process, the way they digest things, process things. And once as a student you become proficient and you gain some autonomy, you can do things your own way. It's kind of like Jesus saying to us, I'm not here to say Moses was wrong, I'm just here to kind of do things differently. But I understand what he did.